It started on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that smelled of rain and home-cooked food. I had gone over to my friend's house to return a borrowed book, thinking I'd just drop it off and leave. But the moment the door opened, everything slowed. She stood there, his mother, with her hair loosely tied back and a faint smile that felt both kind and disarming. There was something graceful about her presence, something that instantly settled and unsettled me at the same time. She invited me in, her voice soft, almost musical, the kind of tone that makes you feel seen without being questioned. Inside, the house felt lived in, sunlight pooling across old wooden floors, the scent of freshly brewed tea drifting from the kitchen. She poured me a cup before I could even refuse. We talked, or rather she talked, and I listened. Every word carried a quiet warmth, the kind that draws you in without meaning to. When she laughed, it was light, unguarded. And when her eyes met mine, there was a moment, brief but undeniable, where the air felt heavier, charged with something that neither of us acknowledged. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was awareness, the kind that comes when two people accidentally cross an invisible line of comfort. At one point, she leaned forward to adjust the collar of my shirt. Her fingers brushed lightly against my neck, and for some reason, my breath caught. It was such a small thing, a motherly gesture maybe, but it lingered. The warmth of her touch stayed long after she pulled her hand away. "You're different from your friends," she said with a teasing glint in her eyes. "More thoughtful. You notice things." I didn't know how to respond. My throat felt dry, my pulse unsteady. There was no reason for my heart to race like that, and yet it did. Before I left, she handed me a slice of cake she had baked earlier, wrapped carefully in a napkin. Her fingertips brushed mine again, intentionally or not. I couldn't tell. "You're a good boy," she said softly, her smile both gentle and unreadable. "Don't lose that." Those words shouldn't have mattered as much as they did. But walking home, replaying the way she looked at me, it felt like something had quietly shifted. Not between us, perhaps, but inside me. It was the kind of moment that makes you question what you saw, what you felt, whether it was just kindness or the beginning of something far more complicated. And deep down, I already knew this wasn't the last time I'd think about her voice, her smile, or that strange, fluttering feeling I couldn't quite name. A week passed, yet her voice kept echoing somewhere in the back of my mind. Asterisk, "You're different. Don't lose that." Asterisk, it wasn't the words themselves that stayed with me, but the way she said them. Like she'd seen something in me I hadn't quite seen in myself. I told myself it was nothing, just the warmth of an older woman being kind, maybe nostalgic. But whenever I tried to focus on other things, the image of her leaning against the kitchen counter, that soft laugh under her breath, found its way back. One evening I saw her again, unexpectedly. I'd gone to drop off some notes for my friend, who wasn't home yet. She opened the door before I could even knock twice. There it was again, that effortless calm she carried, the kind that fills a space without needing to speak. "Oh, it's you," she said, her smile deepening just slightly. "Your timing's perfect. I just made tea." I should have said I'd wait outside, but I didn't. I followed her in, pretending it was politeness that made me accept. Maybe it was curiosity, or something else I wasn't ready to name. She moved around the kitchen with quiet grace, pouring tea, asking about my studies, my family, my plans. But beneath those ordinary words was something unspoken, a strange ease that shouldn't have been there between us. At one point, she asked, "Do you always notice small things?" I frowned, unsure what she meant. She smiled, a knowing, almost tender smile. "The way you look at people, it's different. You really see them." That caught me off guard. I'd never thought about it that way. Maybe it was because she noticed me noticing her. She laughed softly when she saw the confusion on my face. "It's a rare thing," she said. "People your age are always in a hurry to move on from everything. You, though, you pay attention." Her words felt heavier than they should have, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. There was affection in her tone, but also a flicker of something deeper, a hint of loneliness, maybe. When our hands met briefly over the teacup she passed me, it wasn't just warmth I felt. It was a quiet recognition, like two people carrying the same silence for different reasons. Before I left, she stood by the doorway, the evening light catching the edges of her hair. "You're always welcome here," she said softly, "even if he's not home." The words were innocent enough, but the pause before she said them, that tiny breath she took, made them linger in the air like an echo. And as I walked back home, the question I'd been avoiding pressed harder than ever. Was I imagining all of this? Or was she quietly saying something neither of us had the courage to admit yet? Days slipped into a rhythm I didn't plan. I found reasons, or maybe excuses, to stop by their house. Sometimes to hand over notes for my friend, sometimes just to say hello if she happened to be in the garden. And somehow, every time I did, she'd smile in that calm, knowing way that made the world around her feel slower. One afternoon, I caught her outside tending to her plants. The air smelled of wet soil and jasmine, and she was crouched near a row of pots, her hair tied loosely, a faint streak of sunlight tracing her face. She looked up, brushing her hand against her cheek, leaving a small smudge of dirt there. "You're here again," she said with a soft laugh. "You'll make the neighbors talk." I smiled back, unsure how to respond. Then maybe I should start helping, so they'll at least say something useful. She laughed, that low, melodic sound that felt warmer than the afternoon sun. "Then you can start by holding this," she said, handing me a small pot of marigolds. Our fingers touched, just for a second. But it was enough to make my pulse skip and my words falter. We spent the next hour quietly working side by side. Her trimming, me handing her tools, both of us pretending the silence wasn't saying more than our voices could. Every now and then, she'd glance my way, and I'd catch the faintest trace of a smile tugging at her lips, as if she knew what I was feeling and chose to let it stay unspoken. When we finally sat down on the small bench beneath the shade, she poured water into 2 glasses and passed me one. "You're different from what I expected," she said suddenly. I looked up. "Expected?" She nodded slightly, eyes still on the glass in her hands. "You remind me of something I forgot. What it's like to be really seen, not just looked at." Her voice was quiet, almost trembling, and for the first time, I saw the softness behind her strength, the loneliness hiding behind her composed smile. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of things that neither of us could explain but both could feel. The world around us felt smaller, as if time had paused just long enough for the truth to linger between us. When she finally stood, brushing the dust off her hands, she said, "You should go before it gets dark." But her tone, gentle, hesitant, carried something else. Something like stay. As I walked away, I could still feel the warmth of her presence in the air, like sunlight that clings to your skin long after the day ends. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just curiosity or admiration anymore. It was something quieter, deeper, something I wasn't supposed to feel but couldn't stop from growing. The next time we met, it wasn't planned. Rain had started just as I was heading home, sharp and sudden, drenching the quiet street. I ran toward the nearest porch, hers. Before I could even knock, the door opened, and there she was, holding a towel and smiling softly. "You'll catch a cold," she said, stepping aside. Her voice was calm, but her eyes flickered with surprise, or maybe something else. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then walked in. The warmth of the house wrapped around me, carrying that familiar scent. A mix of old books, lavender, and faint traces of something sweet baking in the kitchen. She handed me the towel. "You should dry off," she said, turning slightly away as if giving me privacy, though I could sense her presence just a few feet behind. The soft patter of rain outside filled the silence between us. "Your son isn't home?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She shook her head. "He's staying with his cousin tonight." Her tone was even, but the quiet in the room shifted, heavier, closer. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain and the slow ticking of the wall clock. Then, softly, she said, "It's strange, isn't it? How some people feel like they've always been part of your days, even when they weren't supposed to. Her words caught me off guard. I turned toward her and our eyes met. Not by accident this time. There was no smile, no teasing, just that quiet, searching look that asks a question without words. I could see the flicker of conflict in her, the push and pull of feeling something she didn't want to name. And maybe she could see the same in me. She exhaled softly, breaking the moment. "You're kind," she said. "Too kind. That's why I worry." I stepped closer. Not enough to cross a line, but enough that I could see the faint shimmer of rain on her hair, the curve of her lips as she tried not to look at me. "Why worry?" I asked quietly. "Because kindness can make people forget where they stand," she whispered. There it was, the truth neither of us wanted to face. Her words carried weight, but behind them was something fragile, a tremor of emotion that she couldn't quite hide. When I finally turned to leave, she stopped me with just a touch, her fingers brushing my wrist, light as a breath. The warmth of it traveled up my arm and stayed there, even after she let go. "Be careful," she said. "Feelings have a way of changing everything." I nodded, but as I stepped into the rain again, I knew the change had already begun. The distance between us wasn't a wall anymore. It was a thread, thin, trembling, unbreakable. Days passed after that rainy evening, but her words wouldn't leave my mind. Asterisk. Feelings have a way of changing everything. Asterisk, they echoed quietly whenever I walked past her house or saw her tending to her garden. The same calm face, the same gentle movements, but now, I noticed everything differently. There was a softness in her that drew me in, not just beauty, but something deeper. A quiet loneliness, a kind of warmth that seemed to wait for someone to notice. One afternoon, I stopped by with a book I thought she'd like. She was sewing in her living room, sunlight spilling through the lace curtains, painting her in a pale glow. "You always bring something thoughtful," she said, smiling faintly. "You make people forget their walls." I sat across from her, pretending to be calm, though the air felt charged, like a storm about to break. For a while we talked about nothing and everything. Her son's plans, my uncertain future, how quickly time seemed to slip away. But beneath every word was something else, something unspoken but alive. At one point, she paused, set her needle down and looked up at me. "Do you ever feel like some connections aren't meant to make sense?" I swallowed, unsure if I should answer. "Maybe," I said quietly, "but that doesn't make them wrong." She tilted her head, studying me. "You're too young to speak like that. And you're too strong to hide what you feel," I replied before I could stop myself. Silence followed, the kind that made the world slow down. Her gaze softened, and I could see the wall inside her beginning to crack. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered, but her voice trembled just enough to tell me she didn't mean it. I leaned slightly forward, my tone gentle, careful. "Then why does it feel like you've been waiting for someone to say them?" Her breath caught, barely audible. She looked away, as if searching for the right reason to end this moment, but none came. "I forgot what it's like," she said finally, her voice almost breaking. "To be seen, to be looked at like this, not for what I've done, but for who I still am." I wanted to tell her everything. How her presence steadied me, how every word from her carried warmth that lingered long after. But I didn't. Instead, I just said, "You deserve to be seen. Always." She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, they glistened, not with sadness, but with something deeper. "Maybe that's the danger," she murmured. "You make me remember what I stopped hoping for." The air between us felt alive, trembling with everything we hadn't said. And though neither of us moved, I knew the distance, the careful, respectful space was no longer protection. It was temptation wrapped in gentleness. And it was only a matter of time before truth would ask to be spoken. The next evening, I found myself walking toward her house again. No reason, no excuse, just an unshakable pull that felt stronger than logic. The lights inside glowed softly against the dusk, and through the window I could see her, sitting by the table, lost in thought. For a moment, I almost turned away. Maybe I was intruding. Maybe I was chasing something that wasn't mine to hold. But before I could decide, she looked up, and our eyes met through the glass. She didn't smile, didn't gesture. Yet something in her expression, calm, tired, but open, told me I didn't need to leave. When I stepped inside, the room felt different. Warmer, quieter. As if it had been waiting for a conversation neither of us had the courage to start. "You shouldn't be here this late," she said softly, though there was no anger in her tone. "I know," I replied, "but you didn't tell me to stay away either." She looked down at her hands, twisting the fabric of her shawl between her fingers. "You make it hard to know what's right anymore." The words hung in the air, trembling like the edge of a confession. I took a step closer. Not too close, but enough for her to feel the honesty in my voice. "I don't want to make things harder for you. I just can't pretend anymore." Her breath faltered. She didn't look up. "Pretend what?" "That I don't think about you," I said quietly. "That every time I leave this house, I'm not carrying something of you with me." The silence that followed was heavy. Not uncomfortable, but sacred. Like the world had gone still to listen. When she finally raised her head, her eyes met mine, and I saw it. The same feeling I'd been hiding reflected back at me. Not passion, not fantasy, just raw, aching connection. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I've built my life around being careful, being strong. If I let this in," her voice broke, "I might lose that." I stepped closer, the space between us shrinking until I could hear the uneven rhythm of her breathing. "You don't have to lose anything," I said. "You just have to stop running from what's already here." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, almost instinctively, her hand lifted, hesitant, and brushed against mine. It was a light, trembling touch, but it felt like the world shifted beneath it. Her eyes glistened, the faintest smile trembling at her lips. "You're too young to carry feelings like this," she murmured. "Maybe," I said, voice low, "but they're still real." The air between us pulsed with quiet understanding. No declarations, no promises, just truth. Truth that neither of us had asked for, but both needed to feel. And in that moment, as her fingers lingered against mine, silence did what words never could. It confessed everything. The next morning arrived softly, the kind of dawn that feels more like an apology than a beginning. Pale light filtered through her curtains, painting the room in muted golds and silvers. Everything was still. Even the air seemed careful not to disturb what had been quietly built between us. I sat by the window, half lost in thought, watching the world wake up. Somewhere in the kitchen, I could hear the faint clatter of dishes. Steady, rhythmic, grounding. The ordinary sound felt strange after the storm of emotion that had filled the night before. When she walked in, the calm followed her. Her hair was loosely tied, her expression unreadable. Not cold, just cautious, as if she was protecting something fragile inside her. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. I smiled faintly. "Didn't want to." She didn't respond right away, only placed a mug of tea beside me. The steam curled between us like a ghost of everything we hadn't said yet. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice low but steady. "Last night, whatever it was, it can't be something reckless. I've spent years keeping my life steady. I can't afford to lose that now." I nodded, expecting the words, but they still hurt a little. "I know, and I'm not asking you to." Her eyes lifted to mine, searching maybe for resentment, maybe for understanding. "Then what are you asking?" "Nothing," I said after a pause. "Just to remember that sometimes, even something that can't last can still be real. You don't have to erase it just because it scares you." For a moment, she didn't move. Then she sighed. A deep, tired breath that seemed to carry the weight of all her hesitations. "You make it sound easy," she said. "It's not," I admitted. "But pretending it never happened would be harder." Something softened in her then. The tension in her shoulders eased. The guarded look in her eyes wavered. She stepped closer, slow and uncertain. And when she reached me, she simply placed her hand on my shoulder. The touch was small, gentle, almost formal, but it carried more truth than any words could. "Maybe," she whispered. "We met to remind each other what it feels like to be seen again." Her voice trembled on the last word, and I felt something inside me loosen. Not sadness, not regret, just quiet acceptance. I smiled. "Then I'm glad I got to see you." She looked away quickly, blinking back the emotion she didn't want to show. But before turning to leave, she paused. Her hand brushed mine once more, deliberately this time, lingering just long enough to make it clear that whatever this was, it mattered. Outside, the world was awake now. Birds calling, sunlight spilling across the grass. The day had begun like any other, but for us, something had shifted. We didn't need to define it, name it, or chase it. Sometimes the most beautiful connections aren't meant to be captured, only felt, deeply, once. And that once was enough.